Okay, we are live.
Hello.
Hi. All right. I am going to wait like a couple seconds for some people to hop on. In the interim, I'll just kind of describe what we're doing tonight. So basically, Carly and I are going to be answering any questions that you guys put down below. We're definitely going to try to get to as many of them as we can. But we might not be able to get to all of them. We probably won't be able to get to all of them. But any and all questions that you have, please put down below. We would love to help as best as we can. And just a reminder, this is definitely not a substitute for therapy. So we know that some people don't have access to therapy or can't afford it. So we are more than happy to help in this way. But if you are feeling like you're struggling with OCD, or maybe you've been diagnosed in the past, definitely visit treatmyocd.com and you can set up a free 15-minute consultation with our care team. They are great. And you can also download our app in the App Store, so it's free. And we have some cool gadgets on there. We run some groups. Carly, do you run any of the groups?
Yeah, I run 2 of them.
Yeah, so there's free groups. You don't have to be a member of NOCD to sign up or anything like that. So definitely download it if you don't already have it downloaded. And yeah, so I'll just take a moment to introduce myself. I'm pretty frequent on the webinars, but anyone who hasn't met me yet, my name is Madina. I am a licensed therapist, and I'm also the regional clinical manager at NOCD. And I'm so excited. We have Carly here with us. Oh, she's on this side. We have Carly with us.
Hello. Yeah, I know I'm a little tripped out by which way I'm actually going on this.
I know, because we're like mirrored, I think.
I'm Carly. This is my first webinar ever, and I'm very excited to get to do it with Madina. I'm a therapist with NOCD, and as I said, I run a couple of the groups. I'm kind of like a lunch hour group, and I do new to OCD as well as support for supporters. So a little bit of everything. Started doing some content, social media work. So you might have seen me with counseling with Carly, but really excited to be here.
Yeah. So I think we'll just get into it. You ready?
I think so. Yeah. Go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna click, and just so everyone knows, we don't necessarily go in order. So if you feel like we skipped over you, don't worry, we might come back. Okay. All right, so EB says, intrusive thoughts that dying makes life meaningless. Unlike other forms of OCD where the person fears something they won't do, dying is guaranteed. How can I do ERP for this? So yeah, that's a really great point, EB. That is one guarantee that we all have, which is that at some point we will all die. And so I really like to look at it as a more realistic stance versus a pessimistic stance. We wouldn't want to get ready to die, right? We wouldn't want to kind of live our life in a way in preparation for this thing that will happen to all of us. And so I always remind my members that the best ERP that you can do is to live your life despite your fear. So it does sound like there is a fear, right? Even though you're saying there's not really one. The fear in here sounds like this idea of dying, right? And death. And it really becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, so much anxiety, because you're so scared of dying. In a way, you're kind of dead, right? You're missing out on life. Maybe you're ruminating on dying or researching about dying. And because of that, you're missing moments of your life, right? So I guess the best ERP I would suggest would be to live your life even though you know that you are going to die, number one. Number two, I would also ask you if you would ever suggest anyone else live life in preparation for death, and kind of live according to that.
Yeah, I feel like the only thing I can add to that is there's so much of like an existential like meaning focus to this. And I feel like sometimes when I'm in session and these kinds of fears pop up, they can feel really sneaky and kind of layered like underneath. So spending some time recognizing that acknowledging that there is fear around this, and B, the meaning around that fear. Like, is it that death equates to ending, and what does ending mean to you? And is that what's really scary? Or is it that I'm not going to use my time adequately? So there's, I think to your point, just like you said, there's a fear here. It's just better understanding exactly what the OCD is after. And This one is a little sneaky. It could take a little bit of time. And if you're in working with a therapist who can help you sort of decipher that meaning, that can be helpful. But it's also something that you can just do by holding space for those feelings and recognizing what's popping up. Is it that I'm feeling dread, or I'm feeling pressured, or I'm feeling exhausted? Being able to spend a little bit of time with that, acknowledge it, and then again, to Madina's point, not live like you're dying, just live to live presently.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there was something else I was going to say, but it's slipping my mind. You know, sometimes Carly and I, transparently, we were talking about how sometimes it's nerve-wracking for us to get on here too. It's like an ERP.
I'm full-blown exposure mode right now.
Yeah.
It's healthy and it's good. And I think that, you know, for us to put ourselves out there, just, you know, it makes it that much more meaningful when we ask other people to put themselves out there.
Yeah, of course. And I'm kind of remembering what I was going to say now, because so much of what OCD wants us to do is to get rid of feelings too. I know I talk a ton about this, but I think it's so important. It's okay to feel scared to die. I don't know anyone that's like, yeah, I can't wait for that day to come. So I think part of it too is accepting that that is a scary idea, and that's okay that you're scared about that. But thinking about it or trying to prevent it from happening isn't something that would be the best use of your time. So hopefully that is helpful.
Looking through the new ones.
Yeah. Okay. So Smile Aways says, I have sexual orientation OCD, but with treatment from ERP, it makes me feel confused about my sexual orientation. How do we differentiate between denial and OCD? Do people ever recover from this subtype? And what does recovery look like? So I guess I'll start backwards a little bit. So recovery looks different for everyone. I will say I notice my members who practice ERP the most, and not in a compulsive way, but practice most consistently and learn to really accept uncertainty, typically have the best progression. But I will say, like anything else, recovery is kind of, it waxes and wanes. Sometimes it's better and easier, and sometimes it's harder and more challenging. OCD, you don't necessarily, I don't know if the word is like to be cured. There's no cure for OCD. We can only learn to manage it. So hopefully that answers that second part of the question. And then when it comes to sexual orientation OCD, and really any subtype, I'm not here to help you understand if anything is more or less true or more or less likely to happen. I can't, unfortunately, predict that. None of us can. So that's not really the goal of ERP in this situation. It is to learn to accept that you may never know your sexuality, right? You may be in denial. You may not be in denial. It may be OCD. Maybe you really don't. You don't prefer the sex that you think that you do. So that is the goal. It's not necessarily to understand if it's denial or OCD, because that can become kind of the new obsession.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is that can become the new like theme and trigger that you just ruminate on. Like, wait, is this denial or is this my OCD talking? Like, should I be taking more time with this? I see that come up a lot specifically. Well, I mean, with a lot of different things, but this one comes up quite a bit in session too, where another big one is, if I choose to refocus my attention on something else, am I distracting or avoiding? I feel like this question of, if I choose to identify this as OCD, does that mean it's denial? It's kind of a similar temperature where you're essentially getting sticky to questioning how you're handling the OCD in some fashion or another. And that, to your point, it just kind of turns into its whole new cycle. OCD's shifted into another manipulative little spot, and now you're sticky to that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like, it makes me think of people oftentimes feel like negligent, right? If I don't worry. Yeah. And I always like to say, like, just because you're not worrying doesn't mean that you're negligent. Just because you worry doesn't mean you're super responsible, right? If we could prevent bad things from happening, all of our lives would look very different, right? And that's the lie, or the sneaky path you're talking that OCD takes us on, is trying to get us to believe that we can prevent bad things from happening.
Yeah. And I feel like the only other thing maybe like what I'm thinking of as a person is trying to differentiate the difference between denial, and identifying. Actually, I'm going to get rid of the word denial. Differentiate the difference between exploration and OCD management. Is I talk about the texture of OCD thoughts a lot in session and in group, about how they're urgent, they're pulling, they're all encompassing. Like there's nothing outside of the loud narrator that is OCD in your head. That it doesn't matter if we're talking about sexual orientation OCD or we're talking about elephants, like that is OCD. If, however, the thoughts are more fluid, you can put them down. There is genuine value and interest to them that is not related to urgency or pressuredness. That sounds more like exploration to me, and that might also be helpful for smiles away. Is just recognizing, okay, are my thoughts pulling me? Am I getting pressured by them, or are they feeling more like I actually have some investment in this in a way that I can also put it down after 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Definitely. So many directions we could go, but I don't want to. Are you seeing another question?
Yes. I'm going to pull up Natural B if I can. Oh, you know what? It's not going to let me click it.
Oh, okay.
Let me click it. I'll start reading as you find it. It's a couple down, but Natural B says how to handle thoughts that you like your obsession and that it's not OCD. So kind of similar to what we were last talking about, but an awakening that your life before was wrong. Okay, so how to handle thoughts that you like your obsession. So I'm assuming what we mean by that is, you align with some of what the OCD is targeting. I'm thinking, just to like give an example, is I have contamination OCD. Due to that, I have a lot of rituals around cleaning, but I also by nature am a very cleanly person. You might align with some of your obsession. So you question whether your theme is actually OCD or not a little bit, but an awakening that your life before was wrong. Okay, so maybe that you're starting to recognize that it's OCD and you're kind of having that, these were all compulsions, these were all rituals. First thing that comes to mind for me is grace. It's really common that as a person starts getting into their OCD recovery journey, that they learn more about their OCD. They recognize how prevalent it was in their life previous to being so disrupted that they came to care. And that can elicit a lot of different feelings. It can elicit feelings of guilt, shame, sadness, grief, because it's recognizing that you've been struggling for some time now, and that you're now here understanding that struggle can change, and what would I have missed out on? All those things. So the first thing that I always bring to my clients, my members, is grace. Be kind to yourself. You're learning a new skill. You're learning a new way to think through problems. You're recognizing a very strong habit that your brain is so familiarized with. And so adding salt to the wound by self-shaming yourself or getting down on yourself for not realizing, having your awakening sooner, isn't going to get us any closer to the goal of feeling better sooner. So starting with grace and then working from there to just employ those ERP skills and start to see the progress, because that tends to help people get out of that and just realize, wait, life is happening now. Let's go do that.
Yeah. See, this is why I love having more than one therapist on, because I see the question, like when I read the question, I think of something totally different, but I love what you said, but I guess like what I'm thinking Natural B is saying is that she's like scared, she or he is scared that they like their obsession. Like, what does that mean? Right. I'm sure you've seen this too, where it's like, oh my God, like what if I actually like these thoughts? Like, what does that mean about me? And so that's the new ERP, right? OCD has kind of tacked onto this idea of what if I actually like these thoughts and I actually am a murderer or a pedophile or someone who would get someone else sick? Like, what if that's me? So you would sit with the chat, say like, yeah, maybe you do like these thoughts. That's the first piece of it. And then, and that it's not OCD, right? Yeah. So I see that too, right? After almost like clockwork, anytime I diagnose someone with OCD, they come back the next session and they're like,
are you sure?
Yeah. What if it's not OCD?
Or they start to get better. I can't, like, we're starting to really see momentum and thoughts are quieting down. The compulsions are more managed. And, wait, was this really OCD? Are we sure this is really OCD? So common. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, OCD is such a tricky bugger. It likes to switch gears all the time. Like I've seen that. I've also seen like with harm OCD, it's interesting. Like they feel anxious with the thoughts. And then once we do ERP work, they start to not feel as anxious, which is the goal. And then they tell you, Madina, does that mean now I'm going to do it because I don't feel anxious, right? Maybe. We can't really, I'm sure lots of people who've killed other people have felt anxious before, and lots of people haven't felt anxious before killing someone. So we want to assign meaning to those states of mind.
Yeah. And I think that the one other piece, also, I love your take on it too. Because now as I read it,
I love your take on it.
I do. I think that is, oh my gosh, it's so prevalent that there's this sense of like, what if I align with this and I really am that person? Recognizing that OCD is an attention seeker. Like it's going to go after things that grab your attention. And if it didn't grab your attention, OCD wouldn't go after it. So of course, it's going to get you riled up about something that goes against your values. Also, the other thing, that I bring to the light is we're doing a whole lot of thinking. We're doing a whole lot of thinking and worrying that I am this person. Where's that thinking going? Nowhere. We're just sort of staying still in time, worrying that we're going to do something. Whereas ERP asks us, like you said, to like lean in and just keep living life, recognizing that some of these emotions could also co-occur for someone who is in alignment with some of those harm thoughts or worried thoughts, whatever they may be.
Yeah. Hopefully that helps, Natural B. You got two sides of the coin. Okay. Sitali, hopefully I'm saying that right, says, I have OCD and feel like I've lost myself and start to lose motivation because I feel broken and wish I can just be normal. Any advice, because I find it hard to stay motivated and happy? So yeah, definitely sorry that you're feeling that way. It's never a good feeling to feel like you're broken or you're abnormal. OCD obviously throws curveballs that make extra challenges for individuals. So I'll definitely validate that first off. And as far as advice to stay motivated and happy, I think part of it is to recognize that, again, it's okay to sometimes not feel motivated and happy. I think what happens for people is when they feel an undesirable emotion, they really overanalyze it. Why do I feel this way? How do I get this feeling to go away? How come it's here? And instead of berating or like questioning yourself for having an emotion, right? You let yourself have the emotion. Think of if a friend told you you asked a friend why they didn't feel happy and they didn't know, you probably wouldn't berate them to like figure out why. Yet we tell ourselves to do that. And then as far as staying motivated, we know that so much of anxiety thrives on behavior. So meaning whether we behave in either direction, meaning no behavior or actually acting, then it feeds or kind of kills the fear. So I would get up and do things that you can, even though it's really hard, versus thinking about doing them. It kind of sounds like maybe you're feeling a little bit down or blue. And we know that people who feel that way typically have a hard time just getting up to do things. And instead of thinking about how you're going to get up and do the things, I want you to just get up and do the things. Now, I'm not saying it's that easy, but we have to let action drive our feelings and our thoughts versus the other way around.
Yeah. I'm going to sound like the most cliche therapist ever, but like, what is normal even too? Like what, I know that's like the most cliche therapy thing to say, like there is no normal. But I mean, in actuality, I think every person's normal, or like, I like to refer to it as like contentment state, just meaning you're a breathing, blinking human being, varies depending on your day, the hour, the year. So, I think that can get a little sticky too for people, is I wish that I could be X, Y, and Z, happy, normal, better in recovery. And a lot of times that is a like sticky thought that has this like standard or expectation that is, it's not that it's not reachable. It's the way that the thinking and the behaviors going alongside it, they're not actually helping to get us anywhere closer to that goal. So just a note on that is, a little bit of talking back to OCD could look like, who knows what normal will be for me? Maybe normal for me right now in these next 5 minutes is this, and I'm going to lean into that, and we'll see what happens in another 5 minutes. And then another piece that I often suggest to people is break things down. If you're having a really hard time getting up and going to do the 3 tasks on your to-do list, pick one of them Set a timer for 15 minutes and see how much of it you can get done. I often think about motivation as like a motor, like something that you have to start up and keep running. And, you know, if you just try to push a rock up the hill, like as hard as you can versus taking intermittent breaks and recognizing where your exhaustion level is, you're going to exhaust really quickly. The rock's never going to make it up to the top of the hill. The motor's never going to start. But if you are thoughtful and mindful and meet yourself where you're at and just work to succeed at a small incremental goal, it builds up every single time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just to expand on like the list, like I love that idea, right? You're breaking it down into manageable tasks. And then just even the way you talk to yourself about the list, right? Instead of I should, what if you were to say I could, right? I could get up and wash the dishes. When you take away the should, which Carly was kind of talking about, it takes away the judgment, right? We know that a lot of times judgment is what's driving a lot of these like unwanted feelings. And so we also know that judgment doesn't help motivate us, even though we think it does. So the research shows that we think that if we're denigrating to ourselves or push ourselves, we'll be in a better place, but it's actually the opposite. And you can think anyone on here who has like kids, for example, you know, your kid came home with maybe a not so good grade. You wouldn't tell them like, oh my God, you're so stupid. You might say, wow, it looks like you really struggled on this. Like, how can we work on getting this to a better grade, right? You would acknowledge it and then you would problem solve, right? Today, I'm really not feeling that well, but I know that I could go for a walk because that would help me feel a little better, right?
To your point too, like you said at the beginning, I feel like first full circle, it's normal to not feel motivated. Like that is actually a form of normalcy. So like leaning into that discomfort and like being, to your point, like the constructive coach versus the demeaning coach, and recognizing like today is not the day we're going to do everything on the to-do list. And that's just what it is. Yeah. I feel like this is really, really common across the board with like humanhood, like humanness, whatever you want to call it. But with OCD in particular, I think what happens is that people get sticky to the feelings of lethargy and apathy and not feeling motivated. And then it becomes like its own cycle. So to your point, if we can get behavior activated in there, it will eventually turn into some kind of accomplishment, which builds upon itself.
Yeah, definitely. I talk a lot about like I think a lot of times, you know, even as providers, as individuals, we have a tendency to over pathologize things that are normal, again, whatever the heck that means. But, you know, it's that idea of intrusive thoughts are intrusive, can be intrusive. So can feelings, right? And I think people forget that and they're trying to push these feelings out. And when we try to do that, just like our thoughts, it becomes more forefront and center. There's that emotion again that I'm not too fond of.
Yeah, it's always gonna win. Like we might as well let's work smarter, not harder. Like trying to push that stuff down, it's always gonna make its way back up. So leaning in for a minute, moving to the next moment, seeing what's different about it. I like it. These are all good things.
Yeah, this is a good question. Maybe you can answer it.
Oh. I asked through the app how to join the groups. Oh, good. I was told you have to have a NOCD therapist to be able to join the groups. Okay, yeah. So this is a newer thing. So in terms of other support groups, this resource that I give across the board is the International OCD Foundation. They have a really fabulous search bar that if you put in your zip code, what kind of resources you're looking for, and they have a really long list, whether it be support groups or programs, therapists, it will get everything in a 200-mile radius for you. This is like brand spanking new. We are starting to really do mostly all members that join our groups are going to be NOCD members. You know, this mostly just has to do with the fact that we've had varying different backgrounds and whatnot of focuses, and we're just trying to keep it all focused in on what we're working on here at NOCD. So I would highly suggest looking at the International OCD Foundation, iocdf.com, and they have a search bar for resources.
Cool. Yeah. Instagram has a lot of like advocates and things like that too, if you're looking for support. I'm blanking. Amy, I've done a couple webinars with her. Let me look up her.
One thing too of like Nathan Peterson, and like there's a lot of therapists who are offering seminars, and they also do like workshops that are sort of self-coached. which is
Mhm.
a great option too. I mean, if you feel like you have the ability to kind of read through this material, utilize our webinars and things like that, like you could absolutely take a lot from those kinds of programs and resources.
Yeah. Yeah. Amy's is obsessively _anxious.
Yes. Yes.
Do you follow her too?
I do, yeah. And there's a couple of others that I'm thinking of, but I don't want to throw them out there if they don't actually have things. I know Nathan Peterson for sure has programming like that. But there's another, let's see if I can pull up her Instagram really quickly and give her a shout out. But I highly suggest that. I mean, I think also another point. So I don't know if anyone out there is looking for support for their supporters. So people who are loved ones, friends, family of people who have OCD. I run a group for that through NOCD. I find that to be an incredibly important part of the overall recovery program, the overall treatment program, is to make sure that our loved ones understand what OCD is. That programming is just as good for you. For those of you who want to be supporters, to really be able to not let OCD be the one in the driver's seat. And to be able to support that mission, you have to understand what OCD is. You have to understand what ERP is. So this is definitely something for you to invest into for anyone who might be a family member, friend listening.
Yeah, good tidbits of info. It's like dropping diamonds over here. Oh wait, you guys can't see it. I was like dropping diamonds over here. I was about to say, I was like, I've never in my life had such a hard time with rights and lefts. Actually, that's not true. I had a really hard time when I was a kid, but like since then, I've never had such a hard time. That's funny. I actually had such a hard time with my left and right when I was a kid that I literally wrote L and R. Like took a pen and wrote L and R.
Because there's an L in my name, that's what I would like go like, oh wait, no, it's supposed to go this way all the time. I'm sure people like watched me do that in class. Yeah, you know, but we made it. We're here.
Yeah. Welcome to the webinar with us, guys.
Oh, gosh. Ooh, good question.
I had a bad panic attack recently, and I'm not scared of having a panic attack again. When I'm away from home, what are some exercises I can do to alleviate my fear and get back to normal life? Well, yeah, Olivia, what does normal life look like? What do you normally do before you had this panic attack? It sounds like maybe you got out and did things outside of your home. So back to the behavior activation, I would get out and do those things, even though you could very well have another panic attack. In a weird kind of way, I think it's a very good corrective learning experience when an individual experiences their worst case scenario. In other words, it teaches you to have a different relationship with that feared consequence, meaning you learn that you can handle it. I'm not saying that it was great. In fact, I'm sure it really sucked to have the panic attack, but you figured it out and you managed it. And that was the worst case scenario, and that doesn't always happen every time. So A, we know that the probability and the possibility are two different things. And then B, we know that we can handle that feared consequence. So I would suggest, my first suggestion would be to get out and still live your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be the first and foremost, because the more we avoid anything, the more our brain primes to seeking out any potential. And then we kind of self-sabotage, specifically with panic attacks. Like that can be a bit of a self-sabotage. The more you avoid, the more you become hypervigilant to anything that could set it off, or like a body sensation that feels like it could be congruent with the panic attack. So, we don't want to go to the avoidance route. That's just going to make the fear worse. I think the second thing that I think of, well, there's two things. I mean, I think of like interoceptive stuff. So, exercises that we use commonly with somatic OCD, but it's really helpful with panic attack or panic disorder too, is interoceptive exposures, aka we're going inside the body. So we're doing things that mimic feelings that are uncomfortable for those living with somatic OCD or with panic attack, fear, and anxiety. There could be some breathing exercises. Sometimes like spinning in a chair like this can elicit that. So those are things that you could do. I mean, I do suggest, I don't know, Madina, what your thoughts are about this. So I like kind of fall back onto my yoga training with this. I think that everyone should learn breath work. But when I think about interoceptives, I do think that it can be a really useful tool, similar with breath work and like yoga, restorative, whatever they may be, classes, to be taught them first, to be taught by someone who really knows what they're talking about, versus just like throwing yourself to the lions and trying to just hyperventilate and feel uncomfortable just to feel uncomfortable. I don't know if you have thoughts to add to that.
Like, are you suggesting that they do or don't do the breathing?
That they maybe look into either being trained by someone like a therapist, like looking into working with a therapist who can help with that kind of training, and or someone who's specialized who offers some kind of like workshop, seminar, step-by-step process of how to utilize that properly.
Yeah, I guess like my question, which obviously I don't know if Olivia, we don't know the answer to this, but I think there's a difference between if you actually have recurrent panic attacks and you're scared to have a panic attack versus maybe this, I've had people who've had like one panic attack their entire life and now they're obsessing over it. I think that teeters more into OCD versus the first example I feel like is more panic attack or panic disorder. But the breathing exercises are great. I think there's a lot of great stuff to breathing exercises as long as we understand the intention behind it is kind of my motto, and I'm sure it's yours too. So if you're using it to not feel uncomfortable, I might rethink it. But if you're using it just because that's a relaxation technique you like to do at the end of your day or whatever, I think that that's a great addition that probably lowers your baseline to even reach panic, right? We know that when we're just more stressed or elevated in general, reaching a panic attack is much more, it's easier, right? Than if we're at a more relaxed baseline.
Yeah, no, you articulated that perfectly. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. And I mean, the other piece of this puzzle too is about staying mindful to what's actually going on in the moment. So, you know, when a person, because I've had someone's had like 1 or 2 panic attacks ever, and they're fearful that it could happen again, and it's more OCD driven than anything. And so we'll talk about different mindfulness grounding activities they can do. Like, you know, I think sometimes breathing can elicit a lot of fear and anxiety. For focusing on their breath can elicit more fear and anxiety. So that can be a bit of an exposure. But there are other ways to get mindful and into the moment that aren't breathing. We can also use, you know, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. I probably messed that up. It's probably switched around. But at the end of the day, if you switch it around, it gets harder. Yeah. The more you switch it around, the better it gets. That's just how it goes. But essentially what you want to do is get out of your head, because your head is creating a world. You know, I love this quote. I'm blanking on the ERP therapist who said this first. So it's not mine. Let me preface with it's not mine. If you are living through your obsessions and your compulsions, you're living in a world that only exists inside your head. And so we got to get you back into the world. And we can do that by your body first, if that's what's most comfortable to you, noticing sensations. How does my back feel against my chair? How do my feet feel against the floor? And then getting yourself back into the space around you. And to Madina's point, making sure that this doesn't become an avoidance tactic. It's more so a way for you to get out of that head and back into the world happening around you.
Yeah, I think I'm understanding what you're saying now. Because yes, I think breathing can cause people to feel anxious because they don't pay attention to it, right? They avoid paying attention to it. So yeah, and I think the interoceptives, I say it different than you. I don't know. I'm like, nah, maybe I've been saying it wrong the whole time.
Harleyisms that I find special fun ways to say words. So it could be me. Who knows?
No, I like it. But yeah, hopefully that is helpful. All right.
Ooh, there's a good one that I think is like a quick one, because I think it just goes right to ERP's, you know, abundance. It's the crypto bunker. What are the best methods for dealing with constantly protecting myself from intrusive thoughts? So that just caught my eye, because what do we mean by protecting myself from intrusive thoughts? Because the unfortunate truth is having intrusive thoughts means you have a human working brain. We all get them across the board, OCD or not. Now, that's not to say that the intrusive thought distress level and frequency of someone living with OCD is greater than someone living without it. But there's no way to protect yourself from intrusive thoughts. They're a natural part of thinking. Now, there is very much a way to recognize those intrusive thoughts as non-threats, as thoughts, not threats. And that in itself allows you to live without being at the command of those thoughts or in fear of those thoughts. And so, you know, that's where my head goes is, are you protecting yourself, aka trying to avoid, diminish, repress, distract from these thoughts? they're just going to keep pushing back at you. But if you can work towards identifying them as an intrusive thought, not a threat, working to lean into the discomfort that elicits, sitting with it, acknowledging it, and then keeping moving on with life, you're going to find that you feel much more in control.
Yeah. Yeah. Very similar to what you're saying is kind of my first thought is judgment. I tell people often that, a big difference between someone with OCD and without OCD, the person with OCD is judging their thoughts. They're applying some sort of more characteristic about who they are or their moralities to the thoughts. And such a big thing that I try to teach my members is you don't have to be scared of your thoughts or your sensations, right? Or your feelings. And it sounds like you're scared of your thoughts here. So I kind of like the bring it on mentality, even with the panic attack question before this too, bring it on. I got this. I can handle it. I've done this before. And when we volunteer ourselves to experience discomfort, ironically, what happens a lot of times is that it's not as uncomfortable as we thought because we allowed ourselves, we gave ourselves permission. It's, I don't know if anyone's heard of the tickling analogy, but if you're ticklish, if you tickle yourself, it's not funny. You don't laugh, right? Because you volunteered yourself for that. But if someone else tickles you, you can't stop, right? That's kind of how doing ERP works. And how allowing or volunteering yourself to have thoughts and feelings and sensations. Bring it on.
Yeah, I like that. The tickle analogy. I hadn't actually heard of that, but that's one I'm keeping 1,000%. Yeah. It's a good one.
I know. It's very true because you can't tickle yourself.
You can't. As you I was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. Hadn't tested the theory, but I know it's the case. Oh, we got a reply back from EB, our first question. It was an existential fear. Good stuff, EB. Yeah, so now you've got some tools to mess around with that existential OCD. It's a manipulative fellow. Fellowy.
That's a good question. Here's one that we were kind of touching on earlier. Can my relationship OCD just disappear out of nowhere? Nowhere, does that mean it wasn't real? I just have to, I'm not laughing at all at the question. I'm laughing at OCD. OCD is literally ridiculous. The whole reason, I don't know if you're in treatment or what, but OCD questions when you start to feel better. Isn't that the whole goal? Isn't that why people come to treatment? And it's just so ironic that when people start to feel better, they start to question that too. And that's just OCD's sneaky way of trying to get back on top. Oh, you're feeling better. Let's make you question why you feel better. Who cares, really, right? You feel better. Enjoy it. Experience it. So if your ROCD disappeared, enjoy that time that you would spend ruminating or Googling or checking with your partner and go do something that you really like doing instead.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I joke around in session. And yeah, to your point, it's not laughter of the question. It's oh gosh, this is so, 9 out of 10 times when someone's starting to really feel better. And also sometimes, I guess one of the other things that I think is maybe helpful to note is, OCD shifts. So sometimes one theme that was super prevalent and loud and in your face shifts and it quiets down, and maybe you aren't really aware of another theme just yet. So, it's a very manipulative, attention-seeking bully. But I joke around often when someone is going through this in one of my sessions. I go, okay, you graduated. You have fought every other thing that OCD threw at you. And now it's desperate as can be. So it's going after itself. It's trying to get you to question, was it ever there to begin with? So OCD is desperate as can be. Let it be desperate. Go live your life. And also to add to that, I actually think it's a huge exposure for many people to celebrate their wins and celebrate their successes. And when OCD is quiet, it happens so often that I'll be in session and I'll go, so it sounds to me like you're feeling really good right now. And I will get a response of yeah, Carly, I guess I am. Let me back, please. And as we explore it, there's a fear and a hesitation to admit that they are feeling better, as if OCD can hear them. OCD is going to know that they're feeling better and like come right back at it. So I always say, no, celebrate it, celebrate those wins, take advantage of the time, take advantage of what it feels like to just have command of the moment, because OCD doesn't want that for you. It doesn't want you to celebrate those things. It wants you to live in fear. So you're actually, you're still doing the work by going out and enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
Therapy homework. Go have fun.
Yeah. I know, I always joke. I'm like, see, I'm a fun therapist. Like, go do your fun hobby. But yeah, I think, you know, when you talk about just the mind being geared towards a more negative stance, right? We know when our members aren't feeling well, right? But it might not be so prominent when they're feeling good. And it's not to any fault of anyone's. It's how the brain is literally wired, right? It's wired to notice negative over positive. And the reason that was created originally was because we needed to survive physically. The issue now is we don't need to worry about a tiger attacking us or a lion or whatever, you know, way back when, right?
Yeah.
So I think part of it is recognizing, again, that we don't have to be scared of our thoughts, right? These are not true threats. They can feel really real and valid, and you can totally have the thoughts and the feelings. But there's a huge difference. And we have to remember that, you know, the emotions, OCD, all of that lives in the subconscious brain, which I talk about so much, does not understand language. And so what's going to be prominent is the negative. And so to undo it, we have to action our way out or imagine our way out. So even just writing down, like, I had a really good day with OCD today, that forces you in a way to imagine that day, right? Yeah, so because that's what the subconscious is going to understand, is when you imagine that really good day. So yeah.
I love that.
Behavior and imagery, right? Because we think of like imaginal scripts too.
So much. Yeah. I mean, we are very imaginative beings. And I mean, that's actually a huge strength against OCD a lot of times, like upping the ante. I talk all the time with members about, like, OCD gives you some scary thought, go hold my tea. I've got something more ridiculous, and move yourself into that creative brain, because that also takes you out of the fear center where you are in your brain to be able to feel that fear and to have that threat system response. You can't be there and also come up with creative, ridiculous, ghoulish things. We got to kind of move ourselves into a different part of the brain, which gives you some distance from it. It gives you kind of a 3,000-foot view of the scenario rather than you're like this close to the problem, which is where OCD wants you.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think of, I don't know if you know this, but there's like a lot of research that people with OCD tend to be more creative.
Yes. Oh yeah. And it's so true. I mean, I think it's true. My clinical experience is that it's true.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. Like, I feel like a big chunk of my caseload is like singers and writers and painters, and that's awesome, right? But you guys forget sometimes, I think, that there's an awesome part of the OCD in a way, right? You know, to come up with rumination requires creativity. And you kind of mentioned this earlier, Carly, we need creativity. We actually lost, I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, but we've lost that as adults. Like, you think of when you were a kid, you used to imagine all the like wildest things, and that was healthy. And for the most part, when we're children, we don't question it too much. But then when we get older, we start to judge ourselves for having that normal thought process. So even just reframing like how you look at your creative thoughts, because that's what they are. They're not bad or good. They're just creative, and they're there, and that's okay.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty impressive how much energy the brain can expend on these fearful thoughts, these fear thoughts. And to your point, like, we still have the same fear system that we did when we were cavemen. Like, it's biologically the same exact system, except our threats are radically different. So it's a lot of energy we're spending on what feels like I always say, it's like, you know, you're not just overthinking. You feel like a grizzly bear standing next to you as you're trying to figure out some horrible mental math. And so that's a horrible feeling. There's no questioning that. But when you can shift yourself out of that fear brain into, well, now I'm going to imagine the grizzly bear with a silly hat and a pair of glasses, and we're both going to like hang out and watch a movie together. I'm getting ridiculous. But if we can use that creativity and expend that energy in a way that, again, doesn't set meaning to these thoughts as bad, horrible threats, you can really kind of get outside of it. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I've seen that. I've seen the research written about both how creative and also interestingly analytical. Like it's actually kind of a twofold. When you think about that, you've got a creative analytical brain. We can use that for a lot of interesting stuff. And, you know, it's dependent on how you center it or how you learn how to center it, I should say, because we got to learn these skills. So they don't come inherently necessarily. We didn't learn this stuff in kindergarten. So as you learn how to recenter it, you can come up with some really interesting and fun stuff.
Yeah, like honing it in a certain direction that's more productive.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah. And I often will sometimes ask it as a group question with my new to OCD group members. If we have a bunch of new people, just more so to get people thinking, I'll say, what has OCD provided for you? And it tends to it doesn't always sit well with people at first because of course, you know, OCD is debilitating. It's a disorder. It's a disability in a lot of different ways for different people. But that being said, when I challenge myself to think about what have I learned about myself? What have I learned about my values, the world? It can also provide you with some, I don't want to say good, but creative, constructive material as well.
Yeah. I think right now I feel like we're a little bit on our soapboxes, but I'm going to go with it. I think if you also look at, if you ask someone what their strength is or vice versa, their weakness, they're embedded in each other. So a lot of times a person's strength is also their weakness or their challenge, I guess. Barrier is a better word. So there's good and bad in almost every trait that we have. Good and bad. There's different sides to each trait that we have. So again, it goes back to recognizing, accepting, and trying to pull away from that judgment. So.
Oh, yes. I like these questions.
I know. Imagine we were here till 10 p.m. at night just talking. We didn't realize.
We wouldn't know our rights and our lefts by the end of it, but we would have a whole lot of fun talking about this stuff.
Yeah. Okay, this is a good one. Okay. How to deal with pedophile OCD thoughts because they are so ugly and it's hard to have self-compassion because what if it's true and it's so exhausting? Whew, yes, OCD is a very, very exhausting. So I will definitely give you that. And there's that wonderful phrase, what if? And it's of course followed by the worst case scenario. What if it's true that you are in fact a pedophile or a predator? So I'm going to go back to kind of the theme we've been on, right? You've already judged the thoughts as ugly. And I want to remind you that we all have what you would deem ugly thoughts, right? It sounds like you're identifying intrusive thoughts or unwanted thoughts as ugly. So technically everyone on this live should have no self-compassion. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. No, none of us. Zilch not a man.
I always joke. I'm I have more intrusive thoughts than I ever have since I started dealing with treating OCD.
So true.
And I like to frame it that way because I'm guessing, Chelsea, I don't know you, that you probably wouldn't tell everyone on the call that they should have no self-compassion. Yeah. So then I would simply ask you the question, how come you can't get self-compassion then?
That's I use that a lot in session where I will ask, okay, so if that's the logic we're using, then what's your advice for me? Because it happens over here with me. My mailman probably has it. My dentist, I'm sure, probably does too. So to your point, we've already identified the thought as ugly or as problematic or defining me in some ways. And if that's the case, every human being has these thoughts and we got a bigger problem on our hands. So obviously we know that's not the case. But I think the other thing too that I often bring up in these scenarios is kind of that thought action fusion when you're over aligning, when you're over kind of creating that fusion of thought and who I am and my action. So I need to get a new sticky note, but I'll write something ridiculous on a sticky note and, it will be something really taboo, my poor husband, if he's watching, I will kill my husband tonight and be all right, I thought it, I wrote it, I'm now showing it to you. I've probably shown it to 3 other people today. Is it going to happen? And, I get sometimes I get a few chuckles out of it. And most commonly it kind of goes, yeah, okay. Just because I think it doesn't mean it's real, doesn't mean I'll do it, doesn't mean that it speaks to the entirety of my being. Of course, when you're kind of in the pits of that, it's harder to be able to get that objectivity. But if you can, I think specifically, if you can really work that kind of ERP mentality when you're not really in it, you'll find that when you are really kind of starting to get sucked in, you'll recognize it as OCD. Maybe not first, maybe not second, but maybe by the third or fifth second, you'll kind of go, oh, wait a minute, this is OCD pulling me back in. I don't need to identify with these thoughts.
Yeah. I love that you did that, because I've written down before, I will kill myself today. And shockingly, I haven't done it. Sometimes I have my balcony back here. I'll walk my laptop over to the balcony and I'll say, I'm going to jump right now. And shockingly, I haven't jumped yet, even though I stand right next to the balcony and actually definitively say I'm going to do it. So, if you're willing, Chelsea, or really anyone on this webinar, write down your fear, right? Write down, I am a pedophile, or there's a chance, if that sounds too scary, there's a chance that I'm a pedophile, because again, behaviorally, we have to test out, is that how the world works? Logically, most of us know that, right? Most people with OCD will tell me, Madina, logically, I know that that's not true. That's not how the world works. But your behavior is all that OCD is paying attention to. So if you say, logically, I know that's not how the world works, but you avoid even saying the word pedophile, anything to do with kids, you think about it all the time, that behavior is feeding and fueling that fear. So yeah, we have to teach ourselves that the thoughts don't equate to action, but the only way to do that is to kind of
you got to expose yourself. You've got to give yourself that stimulus. Even just writing the word pedophile or POC. I'll tell people, if I'm noticing my members are getting extra avoidant of specific words, I'll tell them to write those specific words down and put them in their cabinets so that they forget about it until they open it. It's a visual cue. It's a bit of a trigger. It's a bit of an exposure. But what you come to find out through that process, it's simply a word. It's not a definition of who you are. It's not a definition of, what your values are either.
Yeah, if I were to compare it to something, it'd be like if I showed you a scary movie scene once, the first time it's going to be really scary, right? So if I write down the word pedophile once, the first time it's going to be really scary. But if I write it down every day over and over and over, if I watch that scary movie scene over and over and over, it's not as scary at the end, right? It just becomes another scene.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Good questions.
Are you seeing another one?
Yeah.
Chelsea says she'd rather have harm OCD. I will promise you, Chelsea, every person with OCD says they wish they had a different subtype.
Every single person. Yeah. And it's all OCD. That's the other thing to remember. I mean, I know that's talked about a lot on our channel, but all OCD is OCD. It's the same mechanism in your brain. So we're going to use the same mechanism to work through it. ERP, which is exposure, and whether you are exposing yourself to POCD type triggers or you're exposing yourself to harm triggers, it's still the same mechanism. You're still in your fight or flight and you're still working through that. It's not always easy to lean into that because that theme of yours, obviously you have value in it. Again, OCD is an attention-seeking disorder, so it wouldn't grab at that if it didn't bother you so much. It wouldn't feel so threatening. Let's see. Ooh.
Sorry, I'm picking all the questions.
No, you're good. I can't.
I'm on to the next one, Carly.
I like it. I totally delete. I was ready for that.
Okay, how do I stop myself from washing my hands too often and aggressively? Please, some advice would be nice. Sure. I would think less about how to stop washing your hands, and in the most compassionate way, I would say stop washing your hands more, right? Because again, I think OCD will suck you into, well, what's the best method to stop washing? There is no special method to do any of these exposures. It's just about doing it. And what happens is rumination stops us. It procrastinates us from doing the things that we need to do. I mean, you can definitely kind of wean yourself off, I guess. So if I have someone washing their hands 15 times after the bathroom, I'm not going to say, okay, only wash it once now. Can we go down to 14, right? And then maybe we go down to 12 and so on and so forth. So I think it's less about thinking about how you're going to stop washing your hands and doing it, right? I mean, right now, if you're listening, I would encourage you to touch something that you feel is dirty and wash your hands one less time than you normally do. and take it from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I feel like that's the best advice, like very straightforwardly. You just have to focus on not doing the thing that OCD wants you to do, because that's what's going to give you the most progress. I guess the only other thing that I'll add to that is go ahead and do it. Don't go into it with a sense of perfection, because you are unworking. I talk a lot about how our compulsions are like nature trails that we've walked down a gazillion of times. And if you are a nature trail walker, you'll know that as you walk up to a trail that's been walked a gazillion times, you barely need the trail markers because the grass is basically gone. It's very clear where the footpath is. It's easy. It's quick. That is what's going on with the compulsion to wash your hands. It's easy. It's quick. The brain knows that's what it wants to do for relief. When you stop doing that, when you create a new response, you are creating a new nature path. And that's going to entail some, where I'm from, called bushwhacking, where you basically pull yourself through weeds and trees and try to find your way back onto the trail and leave some like Skittles behind so you know how to get back. Like, it can take a minute and it takes time to keep doing it over and over. But as you do that, you create a new trail that is easy, quick, simple. So it takes repetition. We're not here for perfection. We're here for effort. But at the end of the day, it comes down to not doing the compulsion, and at minimum, limiting it aggressively. So use that aggression towards the elimination of the compulsion.
Yeah. I say sometimes, a lot of you are probably PO'd at your OCD, right? So again, the behavior is important. So if you want to kind of like show OCD up, remember behavior. Every time you behave, you are either fueling or killing, no pun intended, the fear, right? So yeah, just remember the behavior is such a good part of it, or big part of it.
Absolutely.
Let's do one more for the people. You want to read it?
Tips for harm OCD. I can't let go of the fear that even after I go through treatment, I will continue to have these thoughts. I'm sorry. So this is actually sexual orientation OCD.
I think some people still call it HOCD instead of.
Yeah. So I guess anyone who's like unaware, what my mishap right there was, HOCD, also sometimes known as sometimes we'll abbreviate to harm OCD, but it's previously known as sexual orientation OCD as well. I have a couple of thoughts on this one. So that fear is a bit of an obsession. It's a trigger. It's something that OCD is using to keep you from moving forward with your progress. The more that we fear what's going to inhibit our progress, our recovery, our betterment, the less we're actually just like living towards it. So I often will ask my members, if they're doing exposure work specifically, I'll ask them to do a script like, what if I do get better? And that actually tends to be kind of scary for them, especially if they're having fears like this, where it's like, but what if I get through treatment and it's still not exactly what I want it to be? And that in itself ends up becoming a trigger. And so we work through that. What if I get better? And what if that better doesn't look like what I expected? And what if I don't always have good days and I still have intrusive thoughts? And you work through this like you would any other trigger and exposure. You lean into the discomfort of the fact that it's uncertain. It's uncertain whether you'll continue to have some of these thoughts or not. It's uncertain whether some of these thoughts at times will distress you or not. But here in the now, you're still working towards progress. And the likelihood is, I'm going to guess, is you've had some progress. And that's why this is kind of scary too. What if I lose that progress or it doesn't get any better?
Yeah, because we worry about things that are really important to us. So obviously your mental health is important to you, I'm guessing. And so that's why you're worrying about it, not because it's necessarily going to happen or it's true. So I always like to say that too. It's a values assessment, what we worry about. If we ask anyone what they worry about, surefire, those are probably their top 3 values as well. So there's not that meaning attached to it, number 1. Number 2, it's sitting with the chance that that could be true, but that's the future, right? We know that when people are living in the future, that causes anxiety. When people are living in the past, that causes depression. And that's why being in the moment and with whatever the experience now, whether it feels good or not, is the most important experience. If I could give like a metaphor to the best tip I give to you and anyone on this webinar is if, and I stole this from another therapist at NOCD, so I can't take credit for it either, but if I went to the store and I had to pick up groceries and I got to the store and the song that was playing was just like really irritating and I hated hearing it, I wouldn't go up to the front of the store and ask them to change the song. I would still get my groceries, even though that really annoying song was on in the background. And that's what ERP is, right? Even though there's those like thoughts in the background that we really don't like having, we still get our groceries, right? We still get out and we do the things that we need to do in spite of that.
Yes. I feel like, speaking of creative people, I feel like if you're an OCD therapist out there, you have so many analogies and metaphors like up your sleeve at any given moment. Because as you were saying that, I was thinking of like the 3 that I usually hand out during session in that fashion. But yeah, to your point, we don't ask life to stop because we don't like the song or we don't like the thing that's going on. We kind of just keep moving, and same thought process needs to go for our intrusions, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Woo! Well, this was fun.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for asking such great questions. We're sorry if we didn't get to yours. I tried to do a good like mix of people because I know there were a few like people asking multiple questions, but we have webinars almost every night. So if you didn't get your question answered, please come back. And yeah, like I mentioned in the beginning, if you are interested in receiving treatment at NOCD, please visit treatmyocd.com and set up a free consultation, and we'll steer you in the right direction. And thank you, Carly, so much for joining.
Oh, this was a blast. I felt so much like I was in the midst of an exposure at the start of it. And then I was like, okay, now we're just talking about our lefts and our rights. Everything's good. This is just normal.
Are you saying your anxiety went down over time?
So odd. It did. Yes.
And was it as bad as you thought it was going to be?
No. And like, very genuinely speaking, the reason that I decided to do this was because I look at what the people I work with do every single day. And I'm like, there's no way I can't not do it now. They go out there by my asking and by their own willingness to try things that are terrifying to them. I'm going to get on the webinar tonight was basically what I said to myself when it came down to it. So thanks to anyone who's watching that I've ever worked with. Thanks, because you were the motivation for me doing this tonight. And thank you to Madina, because you've made it much more flowy for me to be able to just jump in and feel like I was, genuinely talking with a friend and a colleague.
Yeah. I'm just in the same boat as far as feeling very, I admire a lot of my members too, because they get out and they do the things that are really scary. So, and I'm sure everyone that's watching, you guys do lots of scary things every day. So keep at it and keep doing those hard things. And we are out. Bye.